Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down a ton of storms that'll be impacting the United States over the next 48 hours that'll bring the risk for some damaging winds, large to very large hail, and perhaps a couple of tornadoes. I'll give you the latest breakdown on everything that you need to know in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States right now. We'll first begin with the Central Plains, and this is an area that we have to watch for very closely during the afternoon and evening because there are already a lot of storms out there, and we're going to see more form over the next few hours, which will pose the risk for all modes of severe weather, but primarily for some damaging winds and large hail. We'll talk about more in detail on this in just a moment. And then further back out to the north, notice this massive trough that is still located up in Canada. It has barely moved, and this is what's responsible for that flooding threat that we've seen in the northeast over the last several days. And it's also been able to help to aid some of these severe weather threats that we've been seeing over the last several days across areas like the Midwest and the Central Plains. So obviously fairly concerning stuff there. And then back over in the Northwest United States, there's a low pressure system beginning to form that is in the upper levels in the jet stream, and this could pose a risk for maybe some severe weather back over in the Midwest as we get closer to the middle of this week. So we'll have to watch that closely, but for right now it's a disorganized system, but as it moves off to the east, it could intensify a little bit and maybe start to increase that risk for severe weather just a bit. And then back down the southern United States, that heat dome is starting to intensify more across areas like Texas. Yesterday, DFW was only 88 degrees. Today, it's forecasted to get near 104 degrees. So a massive change, and that's all responsible because of that heat dome that's dominating in the southern United States. Now, let's talk more about the jet stream right now because the jet stream pattern is quite interesting. This is what really controls the weather here across the United States. And as I just mentioned, that heat dome is intensifying back down the southwest United States right now, and it's starting to move closer to the Texas region, which will start to heat things up back down the southern plains, which obviously for those in Texas, it's already been a fairly hot summer, and it's about to get a bit worse because of this heat dome. Now back up into Canada, that's where our low pressure system is also located, and that other storm is beginning to form back over in the southwest Canada, and this will start to move off to the east over the next several days. But notice the jet stream. This is where our strongest upper level winds are currently located. It's a meridional jet stream, which means there's more curvature to it, and that's what we're seeing right now across the United States. And then as we go throughout the next several days, we'll be watching for this jet stream to start become a bit more zonal. So that basically means it's going to be a bit more of a straight line jet stream, which will help to basically put this trough here, a bit more of a positively tilted trough back over in the Midwest in the upper levels, which for simplification, it's basically meaning that we're not going to see nearly as much of a severe weather threat out of a positively tilted trough because it's not able to pull nearly as much moisture into the northern plains and as well as into the Midwest. But notice the strong upper level winds that we still have underneath that low pressure system. That could help to aid maybe the longevity of some of the storm activity there if this starts to ramp up a bit. So this is still something to watch, even though it's overall not going to be the most organized trough that we'll have really in the foreseeable future. It's at least something to watch for because it could pose at least a low-end threat for some severe weather in the Midwest, but by no means does this look like an outbreak at this current time. Once we get closer to Thursday to Friday, notice how the jet stream becomes a lot weaker in terms of what we're looking at here. You'll notice back over into like Canada, there's a lot of white space here. This is the jet stream, but it's a much weaker area there because of the winds being a lot lower overall in the jet stream. So overall, the jet stream becomes weaker by around the weekend, and then once we go into next week, that's when things become more uncertain. But as of right now, the European model is hinting that that heat dome will not move at all until at least August. So we have a lot of time until this heat dome, actually moves away from the southwest and southern United States. But with the jet stream might become a bit more active as we get closer to around the July 25th range. But again, a lot of time between now and then. But for right now, things seem to be a bit quieter, at least as we get closer to the end of the month in terms of severe weather. But we could still see a severe weather outbreak at some point. Now let's talk more about the severe weather potential for today. Today's risk is actually the highest risk of probably pretty much the entire week, I would expect. Right now, we have a couple of large slight risks of severe weather, and this is primarily for the damaging wind and large hail threat. But notice the two different areas. We have one from Ohio and West Virginia all the way back through Kansas. That's primarily going to be for damaging winds and large hail throughout the afternoon, and as well as maybe into the evening hours as well. And then back over into the central and northern plains, that's where another slight risk of severe weather exists. That's because we might see an MCS develop there later today, and that would be producing the threat for also some damaging winds and large hail. I wouldn't rule out an isolated tornado back down in Missouri, but this is the current risks from the Storm Prediction Center. Right now, the main damaging wind potential is really anywhere there, again, in the Ohio Valley, back through areas near the Arkansas and Missouri region. And then also back up into the northern plains, we actually have a hatched area. That's for that threat of damaging winds exceeding 75 miles per hour out of an isolated storm or two. But really, the main concern for today is the large hail threat. Right now, we have a couple hatched areas to watch for. This means that we could could see hail exceed 2 inches in diameter. Right now in that circle that I have here, that hatched area, we are currently looking at the threat for hail upwards of baseballs. That's about 2.75 inches in diameter. So definitely make sure you're protecting your vehicles today, any loose lawn items as well as outdoor plants. Cover those over, make sure that's good to go, and then back over into areas like South Dakota and eastern and northeastern parts of Wyoming and northern Nebraska. That's also where we could see a little bit of hail as well, upwards of baseball size. Tornado risk today, it's very low. I wouldn't rule out a brief tornado, but I think really the threat overall today is pretty low here. It's primarily across southern Missouri and maybe northern Arkansas, but again, I wouldn't really go too crazy about this. Just have a tornado action plan in place just in case, but we're really not looking at any strong tornado risk. We don't have a whole lot of shear to work with these storms today. So this is the timing for this afternoon. Beginning with around 2 o'clock, you'll notice storms are going to be in a couple different areas. We'll have a couple storms start to form in central Illinois, another area in western Missouri. This western Missouri complex will move down to the south and southeast. That'll produce large hail and damaging winds primarily. During the afternoon around 4 o'clock, we have that cluster still moving down to the south. Notice back over in Indiana, that storm activity moving east, this storm activity moving southeast. So completely different directions here where they'll be heading. And also back up into areas like Ohio, we could be watching for at least a couple of sporadic hailstorms and maybe some damaging wind gusts as well. By around 6 o'clock or so, we still have storms ongoing in parts of Ohio and eastern Indiana, another area in southern Missouri for mainly large hail and damaging winds, and then eventually going closer to 9-10 o'clock, still some storms out there. Overall though, these are not going to be really organized. They're going to be just kind of sporadic here, but overall the main concern is damaging winds and large hail. For those back over in Indiana, Ohio, just for the main concerns here, it's mainly damaging winds are up to 70 miles per hour, large hail up to about golf ball size, but overall the threat of that is low at this time. Now for those back over in the northern plains, we'll be watching for storms to develop during the mid to late evening hours. So basically after 6 o'clock tonight is your best chance for some storms to form into a cluster. That'll move down to the south and east with mainly damaging winds. It could intensify a little bit as it gets closer to Kansas City, but overall damaging winds is really the main concern out of that. Now as we head into Tuesday, this is Tossing Trampolines on Tacos Tuesday. We currently have a slight risk of severe weather back over in southern Illinois and eastern parts of Missouri. This will be mainly for large hail and damaging winds. Notice though the risk of severe weather goes all the way back up into areas like North Dakota. So we'll be watching a pretty large area as we go into Tuesday. And here's your timing for Tuesday. We'll be watching for storms really down in southern Illinois to be the most capable of damaging winds and large hail. You'll notice the threat for maybe a cluster of storms, maybe even an MCS back down in southern Illinois, southeast parts of Missouri, and that's going to be during the late morning and early afternoon. By around the evening hours, storms are moving down to the south and east through Tennessee. Could still be capable of some damaging winds, perhaps a little bit of large hail. Notice during the late evening and overnight hours, this is around midnight, we'll be watching for more storms to form in southern Illinois as well as through Kentucky. That could pose a risk for some flash flooding, which leads into our flash flooding potential right now. It is a slight risk for tomorrow across areas in Kentucky, Illinois, as well as Missouri. So just be mindful of this. Obviously, turn around, don't drown. Really, those prone areas to flooding, make sure that you're avoiding those as we go into the late Tuesday night as well as into Wednesday morning. And then once we head into Wednesday, current risk of severe weather, not anything too crazy. We have a couple marginal risks, one of which is going to be back over in the Ohio Valley. The other one is back in the central and northern plains. We'll talk about more on this though in our next forecast. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you've not already.